The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, broken only by the imposing fleet of stellar warships. Towering above them all was the Dominator's wrath, its sleek, obsidian hull reflecting distant starlight. Before this monstrous fleet, a single human corvette drifted, a relic compared to the Stellar's technological might. On the bridge of the Dominator's wrath, Admiral Zorvek leaned back in his command chair, amusement flickering in his reptilian eyes. His officers chuckled, their sharp teeth bared in mocking grins. The sight of the lone human ship was laughable. A single Terran vessel. This is their resistance, one of his subordinates sneered. Zorvek smirked. Cripple their engines. Let's see how long they take to beg. A moment later, a pulse of emerald plasma shot from one of the Stellar destroyers, streaking past the human ship. A deliberate miss, a warning. Inside the TSS Valiant, the bridge bathed in dim emergency lights, the crew tensed. Captain Elias Carter stood at the center, his expression unreadable. He watched the Stellar fleet through the viewport, his fingers tapping absently on the command console. "They're toying with us," Lieutenant Rain muttered, gripping the console in frustration. Carter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the moment stretch. The Stellar thought they were weak. Good. A crackling voice filled the bridge as an open transmission blared from the Dominator's wrath. "Surrender now, primates." Zorvek's voice oozed arrogance. "Your kind was never meant for war." Carter finally smirked, a ghost of a smile. "Let them think that." He turned to his crew. Shields down. Cloaking active. The lights on the bridge flickered as power shifted. And then, in an instant, the Valiant was gone. On the Stellar bridge, alarms flared. Confusion spread among the officers. "Sir, the human ship, it's vanished." Zorvek's smirk faltered. "Impossible. No human vessel has cloaking technology." But the evidence was right in front of him. The scanners showed nothing. No energy signature, no heat trails. The Terran ship had disappeared like a phantom. "Find them," he barked. As the Stellar scrambled to locate their prey, a whisper of movement cut through the darkness. From the void, the Valiant reappeared, right behind an unsuspecting Stellar destroyer. Inside the Valiant, Carter leaned forward. "Target locked," Rain confirmed. "Fire." The railgun hummed, charged, and then, boom! The burst of tungsten tore through the enemy ship's core, the impact so sudden, so violent, that the destroyer barely had time to react. Fire and debris erupted into space as the Stellar vessel detonated in a brilliant explosion. On the Dominator's wrath, silence reigned. Shocked expressions replaced arrogance. "By the void," an officer whispered. Zorvek's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. His prey wasn't running. It was hunting. Meanwhile, aboard the Valiant, Carter watched the burning wreckage with calm detachment. The enemy had been laughing moments ago. Now, they were afraid. "Still laughing," he muttered under his breath. Before the Stellar could react, the Valiant vanished again. Their hunt had begun. The battlefield had shifted. Where once the TSS Valiant had been prey, it was now a phantom in the dark, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. On the Dominator's wrath, Admiral Zorvek paced, his claws tapping rhythmically against the metal floor. The destruction of one of his destroyers had been an insult. A single human corvette had outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outplayed them. Unacceptable. "Status report," he snarled. "Scanners still can't detect them." "Admiral," an officer stammered. They're gone." Zorvek's eyes burned with fury. No, the humans weren't gone. They were waiting. Blind fire into the sector. Flush them out. Across the Stellar fleet, plasma cannons erupted, their green energy bolts sweeping through the void, desperate to hit an invisible enemy. But the Valiant wasn't there. It had already moved. Inside the Valiant's dimly lit bridge, Captain Elias Carter watched the light show unfold on the holographic display. The enemy was panicking. Good. They're firing blind, Lieutenant Rain observed. Carter nodded. And wasting energy. A grin formed on his lips. Perfect. Bring us around the asteroid field. Keep cloaked. The Valiant drifted silently into the cover of a nearby asteroid cluster, using the debris to mask its movements. The stellarwarriors still had no idea where they were. The moment was coming. The next kill. On the Dominator's wrath, frustration boiled over. This is madness. One officer barked. We're firing into nothing. Another destroyer captain came over the comms, his voice shaken. Admiral. Whoa, we should pull back and regroup. Zorvek slammed his fist against the control panel. We do not retreat from prey, he roared. But at that moment, a second stellarwarrior ship exploded. From its hidden vantage point, the Valiant had struck again. A torpedo, launched with pinpoint precision, pierced the hull of a stellarwarrior cruiser. The ship detonated violently, breaking apart in a chain reaction. Another kill. The stellarwarrior fleet was collapsing into chaos. On the Valiant, Carter exhaled. 2 down. Target the next warship, he ordered. The hunt was far from over. The real war had just begun. The battlefield was littered with burning wreckage. 2 stellarwarrior warships had been destroyed, and the once confident fleet was unraveling. The TSS Valiant had transformed from prey to predator. On the Dominator's wrath, Admiral Zorvek seethed. His subordinates whispered nervously, their eyes darting between flashing screens. The humans weren't just fighting. They were winning. This is impossible, a stellarwarrior officer muttered. A single Terran ship cannot. A sudden burst of static cut him off. A distress signal. Sir, the Bloodfang is reporting. The officer's words died in his throat as the screen showed the horror unfolding in real time. Inside the Valiant, Carter and his crew watched the Bloodfang, a stellarwarrior warship, drifting. Disabled. Vulnerable. Rain turned from her console. They still think we'll fight fair. Carter's expression hardened. Humans had learned the hard way. War was never fair. He gave the order. Fire. A barrage of railgun rounds slammed into the Bloodfang's engine core. The ship imploded, its reinforced hull crumpling inward before erupting into a fiery explosion. 3 kills, and still, the stellarwarrior had no answer. Panic gripped the stellarwarrior fleet. Officers barked conflicting orders, captains debated retreat, and the cold certainty of death loomed over them. On the Dominator's wrath, Zorvek's claws dug into his chair. The Valiant wasn't just a ship. It was a nightmare. This isn't war, one of his officers whispered, horror in his voice. This is. Zorvek's eyes narrowed. Hunting. He stood. No more games. With a flick of his clawed hand, he activated the ship's experimental tracking system, a weapon so devastating it had never needed to be used before. The Valiant had drawn blood, but now it had to face a truth Carter hadn't considered. A cornered beast is the most dangerous of all. The TSS Valiant glided through space, a ghost in the dark. But with every victory, the stakes grew higher, and the cost of survival became steeper. Captain Carter knew it wouldn't be long before the stellarwarrior adapted. And as the stellarwarrior fleet continued to reel from the damage, Carter sensed something had changed. They were no longer hunting blindly. The enemy was learning. On the Dominator's wrath, Admiral Zorvek's rage had morphed into cold calculation. The humans had underestimated the stellarwarrior. And now it was time to turn the tables. Activate the tracking net, he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. It's time to end this. Inside the Valiant, Carter watched the feed from the stellarwarrior ships flicker across his console. The stellarwarrior were making adjustments, adapting quickly. Lieutenant Rain, any sign of them? Carter asked, his voice steady. No, sir. They've gone quiet. Too quiet, Rain replied, her eyes scanning the screens. Carter's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a mistake. They were waiting. "Get us out of the asteroid field," Carter ordered. "Now." The crew moved quickly, but it was already too late. A flash of light exploded in the distance. A trap had been set. The Dominator's wrath had been silently deploying a series of stealth drones hidden in the asteroid fields. They had been tracking the Valiant's energy signature all along. The first volley hit hard. The Valiant's shields flared as enemy plasma torpedoes slammed into the hull. The ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and the crew was thrown off balance. "Shields are failing, Captain," Rain shouted, trying to regain control of the systems. "We can't outrun them now," Carter muttered, eyes darting to the battle display. Another series of explosions rattled the ship, and alarms blared. Carter's jaw clenched. He had pushed them too far. "We need to jump now," Rain yelled, "the engine's taking damage." Carter shook his head. No time for jumps. The TheStellarEcho had anticipated every move. "Brace for impact," Carter ordered. "We fight here." The TheStellarEcho fleet closed in, and the battle turned brutal. TheStellarEcho destroyers rained fire on the Valiant, and the Valiant's weapons responded with ruthless efficiency. The air in the bridge grew thick with tension. Lieutenant Rain worked frantically to keep the ship stable, but every shot, every hit pushed them closer to the edge. Suddenly, the main reactor shuddered. The damage from earlier strikes was too much. It was only a matter of time before they lost power completely. "We're running on fumes, Captain," Rain said, voice tight. The bridge fell silent. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly out of time. Then the worst possible thing happened. The reactor exploded. The entire ship trembled as the core went critical. Sparks flew, and the lights cut out, plunging them into darkness for a moment. When the lights flickered back on, smoke filled the air. "Damage report," Carter shouted. Rain's face was pale. "It's bad. We've lost main power. Only backup systems are online." The crew struggled to contain fires that were breaking out in several sections. But amid the chaos, Carter's eyes locked onto the battle screen. They had come too far to give up now. "We fight back, or we die here," Carter said, his voice a quiet determination. He slammed his fist on the console. "Activate cloaking. Full power to weapons. We're not finished yet." Outside the Dominator's wrath, the TheStellarEcho had just seen the Valiant's lights flicker and thought it was done. They were wrong. As the Valiant cloaked again, the enemy fleet felt the pressure shift. The human ship wasn't out of the fight. It was just getting started. Carter wasn't about to let it end this way. Not while he still had a weapon to fire. The TheStellarEcho had made their mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And now, they would pay the price. The TSS Valiant drifted silently in the void, barely a shadow in the depths of space. Its cloaking device was still active, but its systems were barely holding together. The ship's hull was battered, its engines in critical condition, and its reactor was on the brink of total failure. But Captain Elias Carter was not one to surrender easily. Inside the damaged bridge, the crew was working against the clock, trying to salvage whatever they could. Lieutenant Rain was at the helm, eyes darting between consoles as the emergency lights flickered. "Sir, we've got 2 more TheStellarEcho destroyers closing in. Their scanners are picking up our energy signature," she reported, voice tight with stress. Carter's gaze hardened. They had no time left. "Prepare the last charge, Rain. We've got one shot at this." Rain didn't hesitate. "Aye, Captain." The plan was risky, too risky, but it was the only choice they had left. They had no backup, no reinforcements. If they didn't take out the Dominator's wrath, the entire fleet would destroy them. The last charge was a high-risk, high-reward maneuver. An energy surge that could overload their cloaking system for just a moment, giving them a deadly advantage. They would decloak at the last second, deliver a devastating strike, and hope they survived the fallout. Carter turned to Ensign Daniels. "How much time?" 30 seconds, Captain. We're still holding it together. Tension crackled in the air as the crew worked feverishly. Carter stood at the command console, watching the incoming destroyers. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown. "Activate the charge now," Carter ordered. The ship's systems hummed, a wave of power pulsing through the Valiant as it prepared for the final strike. The lights on the bridge flickered wildly as the energy began to build. On the Dominator's Wrath, Admiral Zorvek was watching the Valiant closely, his teeth bared in a grin. They had them now. The human ship was limping, clearly damaged, and the time to finish this was at hand. "Prepare to fire," Zorvek growled, watching the approaching target on his screen. But just as he gave the order to fire, the Valiant decloaked. The Exceltheri fleet was caught completely off guard. A massive burst of energy shot out from the Valiant's forward weapons, slamming into the lead destroyer's shields. The first Exceltheri ship's energy field flickered and collapsed under the assault, and before the enemy could react, the Valiant's railguns opened fire, each shot punching through the weakened hull. The Exceltheri ship exploded in a violent inferno. "Direct hit," Rain shouted. "The first one's gone. Focus on the next one," Carter commanded, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. The Dominator's Wrath was next. As the second destroyer tried to retaliate, the Valiant cloaked again, disappearing into the darkness before it could fire a single shot, but Carter knew they didn't have much time left. They needed to finish it now. The Valiant raced toward the Dominator's Wrath, picking up speed. It would be a one-shot kill or a death sentence. There was no middle ground. On the Dominator's Wrath, Zorvek roared in fury. "The humans are relentless. How is this possible? They're not retreating." An officer shouted, "They're coming for us." The moment was almost here. Carter's hand hovered over the weapons console. The Dominator's Wrath was right in front of them, just within range. "Fire everything." The Valiant's remaining railguns let out a deafening roar as they unleashed their final shots. A deadly torrent of high-powered ammunition tore through the Dominator's Wrath's shields, the force shattering its defenses. The first railgun shot hit the enemy ship's command center, and the second pierced deep into its core, setting off a massive chain reaction. The flagship erupted, the entire ship buckling under the impact. Zorvek's voice cut off in mid-shout, drowned out by the destruction. The Dominator's Wrath was no more. Inside the Valiant, the crew was silent. The aftermath of the battle felt like a dream. The ship had taken damage, serious damage. But they had done it. They had won. Carter stood at the center of the bridge, staring at the display screen showing the burning wreckage of the Exceltheri fleet. It was over. "We did it," Rain whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Carter nodded, though he felt the weight of the victory heavy in his chest. They had won, but at what cost? With their flagship destroyed and the remnants of the Exceltheri fleet retreating, the Valiant limped away from the wreckage. "We're not out of the woods yet," Carter said quietly, "but we've done what no one thought possible." The crew, exhausted but resolute, shared a moment of quiet pride. They had been mocked, underestimated, and outnumbered, but humanity had survived. And not just survived. They had fought back. The battle had been won. The remnants of the Exceltheri fleet were retreating, scattered and broken, but the cost was immense. The TSS Valiant was battered, its hull scarred from the fury of battle, and its systems strained to their limits. Yet it was still alive. And so were they. Inside the Valiant's command center, the crew moved like ghosts, their faces pale from exhaustion, their eyes hollow with the weight of the victory they had just achieved. They had fought a war against overwhelming odds and won, but the price had been steep. Carter stood before the viewport, gazing at the remnants of the Exceltheri flagship, the Dominator's Wrath, now little more than a cloud of debris and wreckage. It was hard to believe they had brought down such a mighty vessel, but there it was, proof of humanity's resilience. "We did it," Rain said, her voice soft as she approached Carter. "We actually did it." Carter nodded, but his eyes were distant. Yes, we did. But it's not over. The XL theory will return. They'll regroup. We've won a battle, but the war is far from finished. Rain looked at him, her brow furrowed. What do we do now? Carter turned away from the viewport and faced his crew. They were survivors, and now they had to make sure the human race didn't become the hunted again. They had to press on. We've shown them that humanity won't be crushed. We've made a statement, Carter said, his voice steady. We'll rebuild. We'll take the fight to them. But first, we need to regroup and lick our wounds. The Terran Federation will need to hear about what happened here. And the survivors? Rain asked, glancing at the others. The damage to the Valiant wasn't just physical. Many had lost friends. Many had died in the cold void of space, their bodies floating among the wreckage of the Stellar fleet. Carter's jaw tightened. They'd lost too many good people, but that was war. That was what it took to survive. They will be remembered, and we will carry on their fight. He paused, his eyes hardening with resolve. We don't back down, not from anything or anyone. The silence on the bridge spoke volumes. The crew was tired, but there was an unspoken understanding in the air. They were not just soldiers. They were pioneers of a new age. Hours later, the Valiant limped into the nearest human-controlled space station, the Vanguard base, for repairs. It was a temporary reprieve, a safe harbor amidst the chaos. But the war, as Carter knew, was far from over. As they docked, Carter stood at the airlock, waiting for the final crew member to disembark. The Terran Federation had to be informed. It was time to share the truth about humanity's victory, about the Stellar's defeat, and the new enemy that would soon rise again. Before stepping off the ship, Carter paused one last time. He looked out at the stars, his hand resting on the hull of the Valiant, a ship that had become more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of humanity's defiance. The fight was over for now, but the echoes of that fight would ripple through the galaxy. The Stellar had mocked them, underestimated them, and now humanity had proven something far greater than the destruction of alien ships. They had proven that humanity, even when cornered, could still rise, still fight, and most importantly, still win.